Some people just experience the world through a completely different lens, and I've always been one of them. I tend to transform the dullest moments into grand narratives. A fleeting smile from a stranger? Naturally, it's because she's stunned by the unmatched charm of the man before her. Even a routine trip to the supermarket? That's me. A self-proclaimed billionaire reveling in the luxury of endless choices. But lately, something has shifted. As I began reflecting on my wife's behavior, that boundless optimism I've always carried seemed to evaporate. Not only did I have to gather evidence of my wife's infidelity, but here's the surprising part. I deliberately planted evidence against myself. However, let me not get ahead of myself. I'll explain everything from the beginning. Vanessa and I have been married for 10 years. A decade filled with the highs of falling in love, the struggles of adjustment, and eventually, the establishment of shared habits and routines. These 10 years, as I once saw them, were a mix of ups and downs that balanced out over time. Recently, however, our marriage felt as if it had slipped into autopilot. It wasn't terrible, just monotonous, predictable in the way an unchanging routine can be. Yet, in the last few months, I noticed subtle differences. At first, they were so minor they could have been written off as nothing. But as days turned to weeks, these small shifts snowballed, growing into noticeable fissures, much like the cracks that spread across a car windshield until you can't look away. The changes started with her appearance. Vanessa had never been particularly preoccupied with fashion or fitness. She wasn't lazy. She was simply comfortable being herself. Weekends for her typically involved cozy yoga pants, oversized sweaters, and hours spent binge-watching crime dramas. That's just who she was. So, when she began revamping her wardrobe, it didn't escape my attention. Her clothing choices grew noticeably more daring, sleek, form-fitting dresses that accentuated every curve. Her makeup routine also became far more deliberate, with bold lipstick choices that, in my mind, felt excessive for something as routine as running to the grocery store. It was a startling shift, one I couldn't easily brush off. And then there was the gym. Vanessa had never been the type to care much for working out, but out of nowhere, she signed up for a membership. Suddenly, she was going 3 times a week, coming home drenched in sweat, her face glowing in a way I hadn't seen before. She insisted it was for her health, but something about it didn't sit well with me. After 10 years of marriage, you develop an instinct for the small shifts in someone's behavior, and when those shifts seem to have nothing to do with you, questions creep in. I casually asked her one evening if everything was all right. She smiled, but it was one of those tight, shallow smiles that barely reached the eyes. She told me she was just trying to take better care of herself. I nodded, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that her response had been rehearsed, a preloaded answer for when I inevitably asked. Not long after, a name started cropping up in her conversations. Elton Brickman. She mentioned him offhandedly at first, sharing amusing things he'd said or recommending a book he'd suggested. Elton was a younger, smooth-talking marketing guy who'd recently joined her team. But the way she spoke about him, it wasn't ordinary. Her voice carried a spark I hadn't heard in years, a subtle excitement that cut through her otherwise routine tone. Whenever I asked more about him, she became evasive. Too evasive. My gut told me something was wrong, but I couldn't yet put my finger on it. Then came the late nights and work meetings. At first, they were infrequent, just the occasional extended evening. But soon enough, they spilled into weekends, leaving me with excuses that felt thinner by the day. When I pressed her, she'd roll her eyes and mutter something about deadlines, but her explanations weren't adding up. The tension built until one night, Vanessa came home even later than usual, carrying the faint scent of a perfume I knew wasn't hers. I didn't say a word, but the silence between us felt oppressive, as though we both knew it was only a matter of time before the dam burst. And then there was her phone. That small device became another piece of the puzzle. She started leaving it face down on tables, something she'd never done before. We'd always been open about sharing our devices. Passwords weren't a secret between us, but now her password had changed. When I asked her about it, she dismissed it casually, claiming it was just for security updates. Still, the shift didn't escape me. The breaking point came one evening when she left her phone unattended on the couch while stepping away to the bathroom. A surge of temptation gripped me. I knew I was crossing a line, but I couldn't help myself. I picked up her phone, just enough to see the screen light up. And there it was, a message from Elton. "See you tomorrow. You're out of this world." The words hit me like a gut punch. My hands went ice cold, and my stomach twisted into knots. Confronting her right then was all I wanted to do, but something stopped me. Jared's voice echoed in my head. Jared Freeman, an old friend and retired private investigator, had seen this kind of thing more times than he could count. I met him for drinks that night, spilling everything while gripping my beer so tightly I thought it might break. "You need to stay calm," Jared said, his voice steady and full of reason. "If you confront her without proof, you're just going to give her the upper hand. Be smart about this." His advice made sense, even though it infuriated me. Every part of me wanted to scream, demand answers, maybe even blow up her carefully crafted lies. But Jared was right. If I acted without evidence, I'd only come off as paranoid and desperate. "What do I do?" I asked him, feeling helpless and raw. Jared leaned back, rubbing his chin with the kind of deliberate thought only experience brings. "Gather evidence," he said simply. "Watch her behavior. Patterns don't lie. If she's cheating, you'll know soon enough." I left the bar that night with a weight in my chest I couldn't shake. The message from Elton replayed endlessly in my mind, twisting the knife of betrayal. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay next to Vanessa, listening to her steady breathing, while the realization of what I had to do solidified in my mind. This wasn't going to be a confrontation, it was going to be an investigation. If she had truly betrayed me, it wasn't just a moment of infidelity. She was dismantling everything we had built, piece by piece. And if that was the case, I was going to make sure she felt every ounce of the pain she caused. The next morning, I took the first step. Following Jared's advice, I decided to gather proof before making any moves. If Vanessa had crossed the line, I wasn't going to be the one left humiliated. I found an app that could monitor her messages and track her location discreetly. It wasn't easy to set up. My hands trembled as I worked to install it one night while she was in the shower. My heart raced, sweat pooled in my palms, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, but I got it done. Then I waited. The following morning, I sat at the kitchen table, pretending to scroll through emails while Vanessa moved about the kitchen, blissfully unaware that her every message would soon be in my hands. She smiled as she made coffee, completely at ease, and it took everything I had not to confront her right then. But no, Jared's words echoed in my mind. Be patient. Be smart. It didn't take long for the app to deliver what I dreaded. A string of messages from Elton came through, confirming my worst fears. One stood out among the rest. "Elton can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again?" "Soon." Winking face can't wait either. The messages stared back at me from the screen, freezing me in place as though I'd been doused with ice water. There was no denying it anymore. Vanessa wasn't just staying late at the office. She was with Elton. And their conversations, they weren't about work. Over the next few days, I kept reading, torturing myself with each new message. Every exchange was like another jab to the gut. They discussed meeting up for drinks, sneaking away during work hours, and having lunch dates that were anything but professional. Elton's words were dripping with flattery, clearly designed to make her feel younger, desirable, and alive. He painted her as some 25-year-old goddess, and she seemed to eat it up. Then came the text that cut the deepest. Late one night, Elton sent, "I feel young again when I'm with you." That one word, young, hit me harder than I could have imagined. I knew exactly what it meant. He gave her something I couldn't anymore. Excitement, energy, a sense of being vibrant and alive. And the worst part? She responded with a heart emoji, as if to seal their little secret. That night, I lay next to her in bed, the mattress feeling like an unbridgeable chasm between us. Her body was warm beside mine, but the space between us was ice cold. I wanted to shake her awake, demand answers, force her to explain how she could betray me like this. But I didn't. I stayed silent. I knew I needed more. Then came the night that confirmed everything. Vanessa said she was going to visit an old coworker, someone I'd never even heard of before. I played my part perfectly, smiling and nodding like the clueless husband. But the moment she left, I grabbed my keys and followed her. I kept a careful distance, my heart pounding with every turn she took. Eventually, she pulled into the parking lot of a charming little restaurant downtown, and there he was, Elton, standing at the entrance with a grin so smug it made my blood boil. Vanessa practically floated into his arms, and they held hands like two teenagers sneaking out for a secret date. I watched from the shadows as they took a table near the window. Their heads leaned close together, their laughter cutting through the air as if the world belonged to them. They looked carefree, happy, oblivious to the wreckage they were leaving in their wake. When they left, they didn't part ways at the curb. Instead, they climbed into a cab together and headed straight to a hotel. My stomach twisted as I trailed behind them, knowing exactly what was about to happen. I parked outside the hotel, staring at the revolving doors as though they were some portal to my worst nightmare. I could have stormed in right then. I could have dragged her out, made a scene, humiliated both of them in front of everyone. But I didn't. Instead, I turned around and drove home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel the entire way. I wasn't ready, not yet. There was still something more I needed to do. A couple of days later, I decided to take a different approach. I showed up at her office with lunch, but my real reason for being there wasn't Vanessa. It was Ella Mollygon. Ella worked in the same department as Vanessa, and I'd always sensed some underlying tension between them. If anyone knew what was really going on, it would be her. When I mentioned Elton's name, Ella's expression shifted instantly. She leaned back in her chair with a smirk that sent a shiver down my spine. "Oh, so you know about them?" she said, almost amused by the situation. "It's not exactly a secret around here." My stomach sank. "So, everyone knows?" I asked, struggling to keep my frustration in check. She shrugged nonchalantly. "They're not exactly subtle. I've seen them sneaking around more times than I can count. Honestly, I'm surprised you didn't know sooner." Her words hit like a slap in the face, and the way she looked at me, like I was just another clueless fool, made my blood boil. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm despite the anger building inside me. Then she leaned forward, her smirk turning darker, almost conspiratorial. "If you're looking to get back at her, I can help with that," she said, her words heavy with unspoken intent. The offer hung in the air, thick with meaning. For a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond to Ella's offer. But then an idea began to take shape. If Vanessa was capable of betraying me so easily, maybe it was time to fight back on her terms. A slow, calculated smile spread across my face. "Tell me more." And with those words, the first step of my plan was set into motion. Ella didn't need convincing. The moment she made her offer, I accepted it without hesitation. If Vanessa wanted to play dirty, then I would show her just how deep this game could go. Ella wasn't in it for love or even lust, and neither was I. This was about revenge, pure, cold, calculated revenge. It was an arrangement of mutual benefit. My need to hurt Vanessa, and Ella's simmering resentment toward her. It started with texts, quick and charged, and things escalated from there. Ella understood exactly what I wanted, and I knew precisely what she was after. There were no pretenses, no emotional entanglements. Just a shared determination to make Vanessa feel the sting of her own betrayal. The first time we met up, I booked a room at a hotel far from home. Ella showed up in a sleek black dress that clung to her curves, her perfume wafting through the air like a warning shot. She walked in with confidence, as if she owned the room, and we wasted no time with idle conversation. That night, two things became clear. Ella was as furious with Vanessa as I was, and she was more than willing to burn everything down. After that, our meetings became regular. Sometimes it was at her place, sometimes in my car, parked in secluded spots where no one would recognize us. But the most satisfying encounters were the ones that happened right under Vanessa's nose. At our house, I started leaving small but deliberate traces behind. A forgotten earring on the couch, a wine glass with lipstick smudged on the rim, the faint, lingering scent of Ella's perfume on the pillows. Subtle clues, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. At first, Vanessa didn't seem to notice, or at least, she pretended not to. Maybe she thought she was imagining things. But I could see the tension in her growing. She'd pause when she saw the wine glass on the coffee table or pick up the earring with a faint frown before setting it aside. Her expression would shift for a fleeting moment before she forced a smile, as though trying to convince herself it wasn't worth questioning. But I could see the wheels turning in her mind. She just wasn't ready to voice her suspicions yet. Meanwhile, my encounters with Ella grew bolder. I stopped being careful. We started meeting at the house during the day, confident that Vanessa wouldn't come home unexpectedly. I'd make sure the sheets carried Ella's scent, and when Vanessa climbed into bed at night, it gave me a twisted satisfaction knowing she was lying in the aftermath of my betrayal, completely oblivious. But the real pleasure came from the psychological game I began playing. I started asking Vanessa loaded questions, the kind designed to make her second-guess everything. "How was your meeting with your friend tonight?" I'd ask casually as she walked through the door, my smirk barely concealed. She'd hesitate, her posture stiffening for a split second before brushing it off with a flat "fine." I'd hum in response, letting the silence stretch, the weight of my unspoken accusation pressing down on her. Then I'd twist the knife a little more. I was thinking we should take a weekend trip together. Just the two of us. Unless, of course, you're too busy with work." Her eyes would narrow, just slightly, and I'd catch that flicker of irritation she tried so hard to hide. She didn't like where these conversations were going, that much was clear. But she never rose to the bait, not yet. Instead, she'd force a laugh that was just a little too loud or abruptly change the subject, pretending everything was perfectly fine. But I wasn't fooled. I could see the cracks forming in her carefully curated world, and it felt good. Every moment of tension, every flash of unease in her eyes was its own victory. Vanessa had no idea how fragile her perfect little facade was, but I did, and I was going to keep chipping away at it, piece by piece, until it came crashing down around her. Each time I left behind one of Ella's subtle markers. An earring here, a lipstick-stained glass there. I could feel the tension in the house growing. It was like slowly tightening a noose, a little more each time. At night, lying beside Vanessa, the space between us felt like an unbridgeable canyon. We were two strangers sharing the same bed, playing out the roles of husband and wife, but with none of the connection that once defined us. She was there in body, but her mind? I knew exactly where it was, probably with Elton. The thing was, I didn't care anymore. My thoughts were elsewhere, preoccupied with something far more satisfying. Plotting my next move. Ella, for her part, was reveling in the chaos we were creating. One afternoon, as we lay tangled together in bed, her fingers traced lazy patterns on my chest. "You think she's catching on yet?" she asked with a sly grin. "Oh, she knows something's off," I replied, smirking. "She just doesn't know what to do about it yet." Ella let out a low, wicked laugh. "Good. Let it drive her crazy." It was a game, and I was playing to win. With every calculated move, I pushed Vanessa further toward the edge, all while keeping just enough restraint to avoid tipping the scales too soon. This wasn't just about betraying her. It was about dismantling her carefully constructed world piece by piece, making her feel every ounce of doubt and unease she had inflicted on me. And it was working. I could see it in her. She wasn't stupid, she could sense the shift. My greetings when she came home were too casual, my tone too distant. The subtle way I deflected her attempts at intimacy or tossed out offhand comments about her meetings with friends. The doubt crept into her expression, shadowing her eyes, and I relished the satisfaction of seeing her perfect little facade start to crack. One night at dinner, the silence between us was almost unbearable. Finally, she put down her fork, her expression unreadable, and asked cautiously, "Milo, is everything okay?" I shrugged without meeting her gaze. Why wouldn't it be? Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her napkin as she hesitated. "I don't know. It just feels like we've been distant lately, like there's something off." I looked up, smiling with calculated calm. "Maybe it's because you're always so busy with work." Her face tightened for just a second. An involuntary flicker of anger, guilt, or maybe both, before she forced a smile. You know how it is. Deadlines, stress. Leaning back in my chair, I crossed my arms. Yeah, deadlines. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with unspoken words. I could see the doubt growing in her, the fear that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one keeping secrets. And I savored it. The tracking app had already confirmed Vanessa and Elton's plans for another rendezvous that night. But this time, I wasn't going to sit idly by. This time, I was going to strike. That afternoon, I called Ella. My tone was casual, but my words were precise. You free tonight? Her laughter came quickly, full of anticipation. For you? Always. What's the plan? Come over, I said simply. Get comfortable. We're going to leave a few reminders. By 8 p.m., Ella was at the door, dressed in a bold, figure-hugging dress that was anything but subtle. We didn't waste time. With wine glasses in hand, we began laying the groundwork for what was to come. The night wasn't about passion. It was mechanical, driven by a shared desire for revenge. The air filled with the scent of cheap wine, sweat, and Ella's perfume. It was messy, intentional, and exactly what I wanted. Afterward, we stayed on the couch, sipping wine and whispering conspiratorial plans. I grabbed my phone and snapped a photo of us together, her lipstick smeared across her face, my shirt halfway unbuttoned. It was a picture that told a damning story, one I'd use if necessary. Think she'll notice the lipstick on the glass? Ella asked, running her fingers through my hair. Oh, she'll notice, I said with a grin. And if she doesn't, the earring on the couch will. Ella chuckled darkly, savoring the chaos we were crafting. You're a dangerous man, Milo. Only when I need to be. We stayed up late, carefully scattering evidence around the house. A lipstick-stained wine glass on the coffee table. The scent of perfume embedded in the pillows. Twisted sheets left deliberately messy. By the time we were finished, the house felt like a crime scene. A testament to everything Vanessa had done to me. Ella left around 2 a.m., kissing me on the cheek before slipping out the door. Good luck, she whispered with a wicked smile. Text me when the fireworks start. I stayed on the couch, finishing the last of my wine, waiting. My heart raced, but it wasn't nerves, it was anticipation. I wanted to see the moment Vanessa's world unraveled. At 6 a.m., the sound of keys turning in the lock snapped me to attention. I stayed perfectly still as the door creaked open. Vanessa walked in, looking tired and content, likely still basking in the afterglow of her night with Elton. But the moment she stepped into the living room, she froze. Her eyes darted around, taking in the lipstick-stained glass, the lingering scent of perfume, the earring on the couch. I watched her expression shift. Confusion, realization, and finally, panic. Milo, she stammered, her voice shaky. What's going on? I leaned back on the couch, draping my arms over the backrest, and gave her a slow, knowing smile. What's the matter, Vanessa? Something wrong. Her eyes locked onto the earring. She looked at the wine glasses, then back at me, her breath catching in her throat. I could see her piecing it together, the gears in her mind turning frantically. She stepped closer, the scent of Ella's perfume hitting her like a slap. Who was here? She demanded, her voice trembling. I tilted my head, feigning casual indifference. Oh, kind of like how you've been spending time with Elton. Her face went pale. What are you talking about? I didn't need to say more. Calmly, I reached for my phone, unlocked it, and pulled up the picture of Ella and me. I held it out, watching as shock gave way to disbelief, and then to pure, unfiltered rage. Now we're even, I said, my voice calm but weighted, savoring the impact of the words as they hung in the air. Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed, as though she were a fish gasping on dry land. No words came out. She just stood there, frozen, her eyes wide with panic as the realization set in. For the first time, I saw her clearly, not as the woman I had once loved, but as someone who thought she could live without consequence. She had believed she could have it all. Freedom without accountability, betrayal without repercussions. Finally, She managed to choke out a hoarse whisper. You cheated on me. I gave her a slow, deliberate nod. That's right. Just like you've been cheating on me with Elton. Her face contorted, a mix of fury and hurt playing across her features. You bastard. I shrugged, unbothered. Guess that makes two of us. She stood there, fists clenched, her body trembling with rage. I could feel the heat radiating from her, the urge to scream or lash out bubbling just beneath the surface. But she couldn't. She was paralyzed, not by my actions, but by her own guilt. And that was the best part. She couldn't accuse me without exposing herself. She knew the game was over, and she'd lost. Leaning back in my seat, completely at ease, I delivered the final blow. So, how was your night with Elton? Fun, I assume. Her chest heaved as she struggled to control her breathing. You're a fucking monster, she spat. I smiled, calm as ever, and took another sip of wine. Takes one to know one. She stormed off toward the bedroom, slamming the door with a force that rattled the walls. But I didn't move. I stayed there on the couch, relaxed, satisfied. The game was over and I had won. The next morning, Vanessa exploded, just as I had expected. She stormed out of the bedroom, her face twisted in anger, her eyes blazing with a mix of fury and betrayal. You really think you can cheat on me and just get away with it? She shouted, her voice sharp and unsteady. She stood in the living room like she was ready to throw something at me. I didn't flinch. I stayed where I was, calm as stone, lounging on the couch. Without a word, I reached for my phone, unlocked it, and began swiping through the screenshots I'd carefully collected. Before you start throwing stones, Vanessa, maybe take a look at this, I said, holding the phone out to her. On the screen were the messages, pages and pages of heart emojis, secret rendezvous plans, and late-night texts between her and Elton. I had saved the best for last. A candid photo of her and Elton outside the entrance of a hotel, her hand resting on his arm, both of them smiling like love-struck teenagers. Recognize these? I asked, my voice steady and even, my eyes fixed on her. Her face drained of color. The righteous anger melted away, replaced by panic. I could see her eyes darting from the phone to me and back again, her mind scrambling for some way to regain control. This isn't what it looks like, she stammered, her words tripping over themselves. Elton and I, it's not serious. It was just. I held up a hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. Save it. I don't care about your excuses. The point is, you lied. You cheated. And I'm done listening to your bullshit. The silence that followed was deafening. My words hung in the air like a final verdict, heavy and unrelenting. So don't stand there and act like you're the victim, I added, my voice sharp and cold. Her jaw clenched, her eyes narrowing as she struggled to form a response. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head, trying to piece together an escape plan. But there wasn't one. She was trapped and she knew it. And then, as if the universe wanted to drive the nail deeper, Elton did exactly what I knew he would. A few days later, I heard the news. He had cut ties with her completely. No explanations, no goodbyes, just silence. Whether he was too smart to risk his career or too scared of the fallout, it didn't matter. He ghosted her, leaving her standing alone in the ruins of her own poor choices. With Elton gone, I made my move. I wasn't going to waste another second pretending to play house with a woman who had set fire to everything we'd built together. The very next morning, I called a lawyer and filed for divorce. This wasn't going to be a long, drawn-out ordeal. I hired the best lawyer I could find. Someone relentless, the kind of person who treated divorce like war. I didn't just want to end it. I wanted Vanessa to feel the weight of every choice she had made. When I handed her the divorce papers, she tried to act blindsided, her voice dripping with artificial sadness. You're really going to throw away 10 years of marriage over this? She asked, her eyes glassy as though she was the victim. I met her gaze, my expression cold and unyielding. You threw it away the moment you brought Elton into our marriage, whether it was in our bed or just in your head. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. The truth left no room for excuses. The court date came quickly, which was fine by me. I was ready for this chapter to be over. Vanessa showed up with her lawyer, attempting one last pitiful bid to squeeze more money out of me. "He can afford more," she argued, her voice trembling as she glanced at the judge with teary eyes. "After all, he's the one who's been unfaithful." My lawyer didn't even blink. Calmly, he stood, opened his folder, and presented every piece of evidence I'd meticulously gathered. The texts, the photos, even hotel receipts. Each one was laid out with precision, as though he'd done this 1,000 times before. The judge silently flipped through the documents, his face giving nothing away. Then he looked at Vanessa. For the first time, I saw it hit her. Really hit her. She had no leverage, no sob story convincing enough to sway the court. Her lawyer leaned over, whispering something into her ear, probably advising her to cut her losses. Vanessa's face crumpled. She looked like she might cry, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. She made her choices, and now she had to live with them. The judge didn't waste any time. The prenup, the one Vanessa had once dismissed as unnecessary, held up flawlessly. She was awarded a modest settlement, just enough to cover the basics. There would be no alimony, and with no children involved, there was nothing else left to fight over. When the gavel came down, it felt like the end of a story I should have closed years ago. As we left the courtroom, Vanessa made one last desperate attempt. She reached out, her voice trembling with emotion. "Milo, we can fix this," she pleaded. "We can start over." I shook my head, slow and deliberate, feeling the weight of finality pressing down on me. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. "No, Vanessa," I said firmly. "You broke it, and I'm done trying to fix it." She opened her mouth, ready to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned and walked away, not sparing her another glance. By the time I reached my car, I felt like I could finally exhale. It was over. The lies, the betrayal, the constant questioning of where she was when she wasn't home. All of it was done. Once the divorce was finalized, I knew I couldn't stay in the same town. The house, the familiar streets, the places that held memories of what we used to be. It all felt like a trap. I needed a fresh start, far from the echoes of my past. I sold the house, packed my things, and set my sights on a new city. Moving wasn't just about physical distance. It was about creating a life that was mine alone. The old me, the one who spent years sacrificing for others, needed to stay behind. For as long as I could remember, I had dreamed of opening a cafe. It was something I had pushed aside, dismissed as impractical because Vanessa never believed it was worth the risk. But now the choice was mine. The first few months were tough, grueling even, but for the first time I was pouring my energy into something that felt right. I found a small corner space in a vibrant part of town. Huge windows let in sunlight, and it was everything I'd envisioned. I threw myself into every detail, from sourcing the best beans to designing the menu. It became my obsession, filling the void where regret and anger had once lived. When the doors finally opened, I didn't know what to expect. But to my surprise, the cafe quickly became a local favorite. It wasn't just the coffee that drew people in, though it was good, it was the atmosphere. The cafe became a place where people felt they belonged, a little hub of warmth and connection. I found joy in the smallest moments. Chatting with regulars, experimenting with recipes, even staying late to rearrange furniture simply because I could. Then I met Patricia. It was at an art exhibit one weekend. I hadn't planned on going, but something told me to get out of my own head. As I wandered through the gallery, a voice beside me muttered, "Who in their right mind would pay $5,000 for something that looks like a toddler's finger painting?" I turned to see her, Patricia Quincy. She wasn't like anyone I had known before. She didn't try too hard or put on a show. Her smile was warm and natural, putting me at ease immediately. We started talking, and before I knew it, the evening had shifted from the gallery to a nearby bar, swapping stories over drinks. Being with Patricia was effortless. After years of manipulation and betrayal, her honesty and authenticity were like a breath of fresh air. We didn't rush into anything. We took our time, meeting for coffee, walking in the park, and getting to know each other without pressure or pretense. She knew about my past but never judged me for it. "It's not just a business, is it?" she asked one evening as we watched the sunset. "It's a new life." I nodded, her words hitting me with clarity. "Yeah, I guess it is." With Patricia, I didn't feel the weight of my past anymore. There were no games, no lies, just a genuine connection. Together, we started talking about the future, about trips we wanted to take, places we wanted to explore. For the first time in years, the future felt like a possibility instead of a burden. Patricia wasn't a replacement for what I'd lost. She was the start of something new. One night, as we sat on the beach talking about our next adventure, it hit me. I was happy. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was finally free. Free to love without fear, free to live life on my own terms, and free to leave the past where it belonged, behind me. And that, I realized, was the best kind of revenge. Not clinging to anger or seeking payback, but simply living well.